Welcome to Bridging the Gap, a show which has spaces that two generations occupy and where we contemplate about the choices that the young generation is making. Choices that will impact the futures of tomorrow. I'm delighted to have with me today Saranya Subramanian. She's a poet, a writer, and the founder of the Bombay Poetry Crawl. So whether you're a poetry lover, or you're a creative soul trying to figure out things, or you just want to listen to something interesting, this one's for you. Welcome to the show, Saranya. It's really great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Sheila. It's lovely that you're doing this. I'm very happy to be here.
My pleasure entirely. So, Saranya, tell me a little about yourself in your words.
Okay, so I am a writer and a reader. I don't think you can be one without the other. You can't write unless you read. And I founded the Bombay Poetry Crawl in 2020, mostly because of my fanatic obsession with poetry, with the city of Bombay, which is a city in which I was born and raised, and my obsession with reading poetry and reading it with people. So that's how the Bombay Poetry Crawl started. But I really do think that the obsession started maybe 25 years ago when I was barely 2 years old, and I couldn't help but rhyme words, and I couldn't help but constantly chant things. And I remember this, like my tata, my grandfather came to my mom and he was like, "Yedo mette kattardu," like she's saying some chant or some sort of something like that. And it turns out I was just rhyming words. And so I think I've been reading and writing since before I could remember. Before I learned how to write, I used to recite, I used to like make up these poems and these rhymes, and my mom used to write them down for me, which we have in a book. And so I think the
And they
obsession.
made sense? I mean, there were rhymes that made sense?
Yeah. Mr. Me and the bee got stung, something like that. Yeah.
And from the time you were two, that's what happened.
Yeah, from the time I was 2, which is interesting because like there's a lot that a kid listens to all around. Whether in my house there was a lot of shlokas and songs and Bollywood and Tamil songs, and all of that was always happening. So I think that really one soaks it in at a very young age, and I think I just tried to replicate that.
So was your family an artistically inclined family?
Not at all, actually. I come from a family where everyone's either in finance or in science.
What?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, my dad is an investment banker. My mom teaches yoga. My grandparents have worked in bank. My sister's in finance. So it's just me. But the love for reading and the love for music has been common amongst all of us.
Wow. Okay. So you were born into a family where there was a lot of influences through reading,
Yeah.
but nobody was into the literary arts.
No one was actively writing or creating any sort of art, but there was art all around us. There are about maybe 5,000 books in my house, and everyone's got their own library, and everyone reads a wide variety of literature. But it's always been more passive for them, and for me, it felt like something that I had to just like act out in a way.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what gave you the confidence to then say that you were going to be in poetry and literature and, do arts when the entire world around you was doing something else?
I mean, a lot of credit goes to my parents for that, because ever since I was in the 5th standard, they knew that I'm not going to do science. Like, I dropped maths and science after 10th standard. I was in Xavier's for 2 years. I was doing a purely arts HSC program. And then I went to Ashoka. So yeah, having that family support and having parents and even my extended family to really be like, yes, we believe in your passion and we believe that this is what you want to do, and encourage that. I think if I didn't have that, things would be very different today.
Okay, so obviously you love poetry enough to rhyme when you were two. But when did it become something that you would pursue as a vocation, as a career? Is it a career for you?
I don't know, for me. So rhyming happened since the age of 2, but I was always writing poetry through school. And it's when I came to college, when I went to Ashoka, that I realized that I could resonate with something that Kamala Das had written in this poem called An Introduction, in which she says, I speak in 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. And she says, the English I speak in is funny, but it is as useful as cawing to the crows or roaring to the lions. So it's the most natural thing to come out of someone. And so for me, it's always been going towards that natural feeling of wanting to do what I love, which is why after college, I knew that the only higher education I could pursue was in poetry, which is why I ended up doing the MFA in creative writing, where my concentration was poetry. And even after that, like, I always knew that practically I could never have, let's say, a traditional career in poetry. And if that meant working multiple jobs so I could sustain myself and my writing, then that's what it is.
And you loved it so much to say that I will do all these jobs just to sustain it?
Yeah, basically that. Because it's something that I need to do. I say this often, that working jobs is food for the stomach, but this is food for the soul. And if I didn't have this, I don't think that it's easy to find direction in life. And I feel very lucky and very blessed that I knew right from the start that this is what I'm meant to do. Which is right.
So was there a day or a time or something where, the switch went on saying, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
So, writing poetry has always been there, but making poetry accessible, making it something that other people can experience and enjoy, happened in my final year of my undergraduate program when I was at Ashoka, because I had such amazing teachers. Like Anjum Hassan was my poetry teacher. I had the chance to be taught digital humanities and to really connect places with literature. And so I thought, why not do this with the poets that I love? So that is when possibly the switch happened for the Bombay Poetry Crawl. But when it comes to my own writing, I think it's always been there.
Interesting. Before I ask you more about the Bombay Poetry Crawl, there's one question that's coming to my mind. In your introduction, you mentioned that yours was a home which had Sanskrit shlokas, which had Bollywood music, which had Tamil music. How has all that come together, and how has that developed you as a person who absorbs from your own culture and weaves that in with a language which might not be our own, which is English? So how do the two come together?
Yeah, the question of English being an Indian language or not was one that was very prominent in the 20th century, especially among the 20th century poets, which is my area of research and my area of focus. However, I think that for me, by the time I started writing, it became an arbitrary question. I think that English is an Indian language, and it's this hodgepodge, mixed breed of a language that I speak, which takes from Tamil and Hindi and Urdu and some Sanskrit and, just about every Marathi in Bombay and just about every language all around. And that's what brings it together. So all of these influences, I think they taught me that the freedom that I find in poetry is not that you have to write something perfectly, but it's the chance to play with words. And if that means turning them around, making them do cartwheels, putting them one on top of the other. Arun Kolatkar, for instance, he wrote a poem called The Butterfly, which is in Marathi, which is literally words all over the page like a butterfly flying. So that's what makes me feel so liberated, is that poetry is not about proper language. It's about playing with language.
Interesting. So you've been talking about the Bombay Poetry Crawl. I don't know what a poetry crawl is. What do you do? Tell us, and me and our listeners and viewers, tell us, what is a poetry crawl?
Yeah, so we're very lucky that we live in a city. Currently, Bombay is a city that is known for industry and finance and capital
And Bollywood.
And Bollywood, definitely. But what we often seem to forget is that it was also a very rich artistic city. So in the 20th century, there were poets and there were writers, artists, theater practitioners who lived in the city, who wrote about the city, who congregated in different parts, like Samovar Cafe in
Oh, yes.
yeah, or the Wayside Inn opposite that, Military Cafe. What we do is that we go to locations in which the Bombay poets have written about a certain neighborhood, a certain place, a cafe, a person, a street, a road, a dump yard, a landfill site, a brothel. We go to these, a mosque, a church, a synagogue, a temple. We go to these places in Bombay that were written about, and we read poems there. And in doing so, we bring the city to life through poetry and through what the poets were saying. So it's really a call to listen to the poet's city.
So it is somewhat like a heritage walk, but seeing it through the eyes of poets.
Yeah, exactly that. So I host walks in 3 different languages, the Anglophone poets of the 20th century. So that is, that includes Arun Kolatkar, Adil Jasawala, Eunice D'Souza, Guy Patel, Dilip Chitre, who also wrote in Marathi, all of these different English writing poets. And then I have them in Marathi, in which we read Namdev Dhasal, which is in the Kamathipura area. I have a ladies' local poetry crawl, which is in the train, so that we read like Malika Amar Sheikh. I have
I'm
one.
getting goosebumps as you're
Yeah,
talking.
one
Wow.
on the abandoned textile mills of Bombay because of the great strike of 1982. So there we read, Narayan Surve, Keshav Mishram, Amol Redditch, these like incredible activist poets and writers who came from marginalized communities. And then the third language is the Urdu poets. So the Urdu poets came to Bombay in like the early 40s.
You did have
pre-independence.
Urdu poetry finding some kind of roots in Bombay?
Absolutely. In fact, the All India Progressive Writers Association, which is in Urdu, and I'm going to butcher this, is called the Anjuman Tarakki Pasand Munassifin-e-Hind, which was this nationalist movement that started in the 30s. The first meeting was presided by Premchand actually in Lucknow, and they came to Bombay in I think 42 or 43. And that's when they kind of set up shop here. So the Urdu poets that we know of, Kaifi Azmi, Sahil Ludhianvi, Manto Chugtai, who are prose writers, Ali Sardar Jafri, Makhdoom, all of these guys came to Bombay on and off, but many of them ended up living here. Nida Fazli, they either worked in the film industry or they held these mushairas, these grand things in like Madanpura, Baikala, Mira Road, and it was this really active scene. So the fact that when I started to realize that there were these 3 major languages, and of course there's Gujarati poets in Bombay and Tamil poets in Bombay, and I'm yet to research them, but these 3 main languages is what I'm interested in, and these are what I make people walk with me through.
Wow. And what really sparked this concept of a poetry crawl, Bombay poetry crawl? Something must have happened, right? So, what was the process to creating such a beautiful experience?
Yeah, and again, all the credit goes to the education that I've been blessed to have. I was at Ashoka in my 4th year, which is the year in which we write our thesis. And my advisor, Dr. Johannes Burgers, he taught digital humanities,
Okay.
which is this new strain in academia, which is about, we did stuff like archiving, literature, spatial mapping, geotagging locations in literature, which was really fascinating. But what I wanted to focus on was just Arun Kolatkar's Kala Ghoda poems, which is this book of poems that came out in 2004.
Okay.
And so that was my area of research. And my thesis, what I did with Dr. Burgers was I spatially located all of the characters found in Kala Ghoda poems. And this includes not just people. This was also animals, stray dogs and cats and crows. This was also piles of litter on the road, garbage, landfill sites, buildings. Every name, place, animal, thing that I could find in his poems in the streets of Kala Ghoda is what I located.
Okay.
And then doing so, because it was an academic project, my thesis was, how the street life in Kala Ghoda poems exposes uneven development. And it's a Marxist theory that talks about how capitalism produces urban spaces, and there's a lot of inequality because of that. But that's really when my primary research was walking around the city, and it was looking for these locations that Kolatkar wrote in. For instance, I know that he wrote at this is very popular knowledge that he used to be at the Wayside Inn Cafe, which today is a Punjab grill. But the fact that that was his vantage point, and he was found there once a week, and everyone who wanted to meet him had to go and meet him there, and to find all of these locations, to look for that one banyan tree that he's talking about, or the High Court, the Mantralaya, the Stock Exchange, to look for that one drunkard who is the main character of one of his poems in the streets of Kala Ghoda. That was the most enjoyable part. So I was like, you know what, everyone should experience this with me. I'm going to take everybody on a poetry crawl.
And that's how it got formed.
That's how it started.
Wow. And as you embarked on it and you continued with it, was there a deeper purpose that arose out of the poetry crawl? Was there something that was more rooted that you wanted now to continue with the poetry crawl for?
Absolutely. So I think it first started with me enjoying it, and I'm a bit of a nostalgic, so I will admit to that, trying to recreate a city that I didn't know, that I possibly glorify how it used to be in the 20th century. It started off with that, with trying to hold on to the past, or trying to archive some sort of Bombay that is now Mumbai. But then it went on to I realized that there was very little information out there for me to learn from about the Bombay poets. There are very few, there's Letitia Zecchini, Anjali Nedlikar who have written on them. There's Cornell has these archives of the Bombay poets. And it was so hard for me to find any of that in my own city, in any of the three languages. So then I realized that if I'm taking people on these walks, it is a bigger responsibility that I have to make sure that knowledge becomes more accessible, really.
So you told me that you found getting information about the Bombay poets in Bombay difficult. Tell me a little more about that.
So there are a few books available. There are some translations of some of the Bombay poets. Jerry Pinto has translated Malika Amar Sheikh. He's translated Narayan Surve. There are, these collected anthologies of, say, Eunice D'Souza available, or, Adil's books are still coming out because he's actively writing. But it's really hard to find some of the books that were published in the 70s. For example, an H.O. Nazareth book, which was published by Clearinghouse in the 70s. How Do You Withstand Body, which is Geet Patel's iconic book of poems, again came out in the 70s. These things are really hard to find. But I was very lucky because I had the good fortune of meeting Adil Jasawala, one of the great living Bombay poets, in 2018. I met him first for my thesis, and ever since then, he's an incredible archivist, and he's got the best memory I know. And just out of the goodness of his heart, he's just been giving me letters that the Bombay poets wrote to each other, unpublished work, or really obscure books that are no longer in print. Early Marathi works of Arun Kolatkar, books by Dilip Chitre, books by Sunita Banerjee, these poets that aren't talked about too much. He's given me photographs, cassettes, recordings that they have from the 60s performing poetry. So all of the archives that I have is because of Adil Jasawala in person, and then the rest of it is, now I'm slowly learning that if I want certain maps of Bombay, then Asiatic Society will have that, or the David Sassoon Library has a few good material. So just it's about piecing it together then.
So you're telling me that certain books that contain the works of certain poets are no longer available?
They are either no longer available or very hard to find. So, for instance, Adil Jasawala had published this iconic collection in 1974 called New Writing in India, which was a Penguin book. And he was charged with finding writers from all over the country and getting their writing together. That was supposed to be going into reprint. I don't know when it's out yet, but that has been so important to putting India on the global literary map, but it's no longer available anywhere.
So you were about 20, 21 when you started talking to Adil Jasawala,
Yeah.
right? and talking to a lot of other people.
Yes.
Because I know that you also spoke to people overseas.
Yes, yes. Anjali Nerlikar, Shanta Gokhale, who's a Marathi writer in Bombay, Jerry Pinto, Ranjit Hoskote, Arundhati Subramaniam. Yeah, all over.
So you spoke to a lot of
Yeah.
people. You were a kid at
Yeah.
20, 21.
Yeah.
What did you do that made them listen to you?
I think I was just relentless is one thing. I was dumb as dirt. Like, don't get me wrong, being 21 and thinking that you know everything is a very common flaw. But I think these were just very genuine people that I think I just got lucky that they were just so kind and willing to help out with research.
I'm sure they're very kind, but as a young person, what are one or two things that you did that got you the ears and the attention of people so much older than you?
I would say though that it's just about confidently reaching out to people, because when someone realizes that you have a passion and that you really are in, like, your heart is in something, then I think that's when they also see it's genuine. So I would say just send that mail without thinking about it.
And what happened? What would you go through when somebody would say, I don't have time, no, I'm not interested, or you'd not get a response?
Yeah, that happens a lot. That happened
Even
to
now?
me today, I think.
Oh, really?
It happens every single day. So what?
So, how do you deal with it?
Find someone else.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because in my mind, when I think of a poet, I think of somebody soft, sensitive. I think of someone who's very emotionally driven, all the stereotypes attached to poetry and poets. And what I'm hearing you saying is that you are also this go getter, nothing will get me down kind of person. So, where does your energy come from?
You know, it's really funny that you say that, because I am just as much of an emotional mess as any other stereotypical writer would be. But what makes you really strong doing this is the constant rejection that you get. Every field has an occupational hazard, and for me it's rejection. And I get rejection just about every day, from a magazine, from a newspaper, from a person who I want to interview. So that's not new. What keeps me going is, again, like I say, I write because I must, because I just have to. It's as natural as a crow cawing.
Has it ever happened that when you've been rejected, you have actually turned around and said, I don't even know why I'm writing poetry? Or I don't even know why I'm doing this Bombay poetry crawl. I should just quit everything and maybe pick up a job and just stay in it.
I have felt that way about jobs that I have applied to, where I'm
Okay.
like, oh, why am I applying for this field or this career? But never about my writing, never about the Bombay Poetry Crawl. And again, that's a huge blessing for me that so early on I knew that, like, it just feels like an extension of myself. And it's the one part of myself, of my life, that I have nurtured, that I have protected so much that I don't think any negativity can permeate.
Wow. Incredible. I think there's a lesson to learn there. I think for me, one of the generational gaps is that in my generation, we were very unsure of a lot of things. And we pretty much just, went through life trying to figure our way out. Having this kind of self belief was almost seen as arrogance.
Oh no.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was seen as arrogance. It was like, don't get too arrogant, you'll just fall flat on your face.
Especially with women, I'm sure.
I think with women and men, because it was a different world at that time, you needed to play different roles. So for me to hear this is very interesting, and I'm actually learning out of it that the ability to say, I believe in it so much that I'm not going to let go, is really very, very empowering.
I think it's also I can't do anything else. Like, for me, this is it. This is my life. I will refuse to try to do anything else.
Wow.
I refuse rejection. Sorry.
Is poetry a commercially viable occupation?
I might get a lot of hate for saying this so reductively, but no,
Okay.
it is not.
It is not.
It is not. At least in my world, in my experience, it is not. And I don't think anyone should choose to write with the purpose of making money. I don't think it's possible. And that's okay. But yeah, in my experience, no.
So and is money important to you?
Absolutely.
Now, isn't that a contradiction in terms?
100%. And, I say this facetiously, but I love money. I think money is very important. I think anyone who says that, money isn't the biggest thing, that, you pursue your passion and money will follow you, I don't believe in that. I don't think that is true. I think, and actually Shah Rukh Khan said this. He said, "Gurbat mein creativity nahi hoti hai." That, you have to, it is important to give yourself a lifestyle that you want. It is important to work. And I have been working jobs since I was 15 years old, and it's always been in the arts. I will never earn as much as my friends in finance do, but it's enough to sustain my lifestyle. It's enough to give back to my family, to my parents, and to, most importantly, give myself the time to write. But yeah, money is important.
And that's an interesting point that you made, that you need time to write.
Yeah.
So, do you have a discipline around the writing? Do you get up in the morning and say, 2 hours, I'm going to write, come what may? How do you create that time to write, and what do you do in that time?
I think I've gotten better at it with age, because earlier it was very hard for me to just sit and look at my book on my laptop. But yeah, it is very important to have writing time. Writing is a discipline. I think the passion and, the love for it is great and everything, but to actually sustain it, to become a better writer and a better reader, one has to sit every single day. So I started now with I have writing hours every day. I find that I write best when I wake up in the morning and before I go to sleep.
So, 6 hours
Yeah.
is what you keep aside for writing.
Yeah.
That's like a full-time job.
It is. Yeah. And it's not always successful, like a full-time job.
Absolutely.
But as long as you show up.
Okay. And then you said you read and you archive.
Yeah.
So, this archival project that you're doing, is it linked to the Bombay Poetry Crawl?
So the Bombay Poetry Crawl is officially divided into 3 parts.
Okay.
The first is the poetry crawls, that I do the active walks around the city. Not just Bombay, I also did one in Chennai recently for Bharatiyar. So I'm expanding city. So that's the poetry walks part of it. Second is I'm digitizing the archives. So whatever Adil has given me, the books, the magazines, these little magazines that were published in Marathi, in English, in Hindi, in Gujarati, all of these material that I'm trying to get online. And so that people can access it, unlike, trying to pay money to go through Cornell or some
Yeah,
international
yeah.
library. And the third part is hosting these talks. So podcasts or conversations, panels. So those are 3 ways in which I really want to build research around the Bombay poets.
What do you want happening through this research?
So at a personal level, I want to bring back to life, or I want to create a city that doesn't exist through my poems. The idea is to realize that all of these artistic movements were connected. For instance, when the Baroda artists came to Bombay, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, one of them, was also a poet. Dilip Chitre, who wrote in Marathi and English, is also a painter. The fact that these, the IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Association, which was a part of the Communist Party of India, is also connected to the Urdu Progressives movement. The fact that Namdev Dhasal started the Dalit Panthers movement. So there were all of these active scenes happening in the city of Bombay that I want people to realize there's so much more to the city and the country than just Sarojini Naidu, Rabindranath Tagore, or, the poets that we are allowed to read. A lot of these poets are quite controversial to possibly every government, and there's a reason why a lot of them are not very popular. But the fact that they are connected to the beats in the US, or the British poets, or the Black Panthers movement, that makes one realize that this was an international ecosystem that was really thriving, that we cannot forget, because they are the reason why we are here today.
That's so interesting. So you're basically saying that there was a kind of network of poets and activists and theater personalities. And putting all that together gives you a clearer picture of a city at a certain time.
A clearer picture that is actually a very fractured, fragmented city. So we cannot say that, everyone in Bombay lives the same life, because in every, like, one parallel road to the other, one neighborhood to the next, there are economic disparities, there are communal tensions, there are so many political, social issues that make you realize that you live multiple time zones and multiple lives in the same city.
Same city.
So yes, the Bombay poets were connected to, say, the Hungryalists in Bengal, which is the other poetry movement, or the Manikodi writers from Tamil Nadu did come to Bombay, and all of these connections were there. But what it tells us is that there are so many Bombays and so many Indias, and that there's never the singular nation that we imagine.
I think there is a singular nation, but it has many nuances. I like to see it like that.
Perhaps, yeah.
Because I have heard a lot of people saying there are a lot of Indias. For me, there is only one nation. But within that nation, there are a lot of nuances of culture, of language, of food, of dress, of arts and crafts. So there are multiple parts to it.
Yeah.
That's how I would see it.
That is true. And what's most exciting is to see how these all link to each other. I do a walk for Meena Kumari, whom we all know as, the tragedy queen and all of that. I do this with my friend Vasvi Kejriwal, who's also a poet. And in walking her city, we find out that when she was young, when she would meet, say, Kamal Amrohi in private, or she would go to a doctor called Dr. Jahangir Jasawala. Who is that? Adil Jasawala's father.
Oh my God.
Yeah, when I do the Namdev Dhasal crawl, let's say this is Kamathipura, right? We're doing the crawl over here. The main road right over here that goes towards Madanpura, that's where I do the Urdu poets crawl. So you see, they were right next to each other, possibly at the same time. So discovering these connections, like you said, is the nuances that one finds.
And I think it's also about really poetry coming to life in places rather than just remaining on pages in a library book.
Which I think that the poets, in my opinion, that's how it's really fun to read them, because their poetry isn't romanticizing. It's not like a Wordsworth poem about beautiful daffodils. It is about kachara. It is about the mess of a city, the urban slaughter of civilization. And so when you walk through the streets and you read them, they literally ask you to stop and smell the roses, the pipes, the alcohol, the open gutters, the sewage, the filth all around. And it's important to recognize every sensorial aspect of the city in order to realize that it's not just this one, beautiful cosmopolitan place.
Wow. So as a poet yourself, what triggers you to write? Because while you were talking about the various aspects of the city, on the road, garbage dump, somebody spitting, and the beautiful sea, and the high rises. They're both sides to the city, right? There's not just one side. Obviously, a lot of things trigger poets in different ways. What triggers you personally? Is it an emotion? Is it a feeling? Is it a thought? Is it a reflection of something you've seen?
It's many things, actually. Sometimes it's a sound. I like to, sometimes if I'm actively trying to write a poem, I try to go sense first. So either a sight, a smell, a sound, a taste, and I start from there. Sometimes I'm just watching a movie and I feel inspired. Sometimes I'm listening to a song and I feel inspired. Sometimes I'm in a bus, I'm traveling, I'm in a train, I'm in a flight, and a thought comes to you. And that's when you feel like writing a poem. But I think, again, to make it an active discipline is to sit down every day and do it.
And at that time, do you need a trigger, or have you trained yourself now to just sit down and write in the flow?
Unfortunately, I need a trigger when it comes to poetry. For me, it's quite intuitive. If it doesn't come from my instinct, then it's harder for me to create one. So I tend to write prose or non-fiction. That comes to me a lot easier.
Okay. It's very interesting, Saranya. You're saying you love to do something that doesn't come to you easily or as easy as prose.
Yeah.
I mean, if you did want to write, you could be a prose writer.
Yeah.
But you chose to be a poetess
Yeah.
or a poet.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they use the word poetess anymore, but a poet. You chose to be that. Um, why would you take a tougher path?
For me, actually, writing a prose, like writing a short story, is a lot tougher than writing a poem.
Okay.
Because I think the MFA or just reading a lot more poetry has trained me to um, create a poem, which is what, in my opinion, is playing with language. So for me, it is actually very mathematical, it's very logical when you create a poem versus writing anything else. So, yes, it is trickier because there are you're breaking rules as you're making rules, and you're also adhering to certain poetic norms, but you're also trying to find your own. So I find that really fun. It's almost like solving a math problem, which I don't know anything about math, so don't ask me about math, but it feels like it sounds like that.
Do you have a favorite poem?
So many.
So
It's really
one
hard to
that you
choose.
always go back to find inspiration and joy. Do you have one like
Of
that?
my own?
Of course, of course.
Yeah, I do actually. It's called Prabha Devi Before Dawn.
Oh, I'd
It's
love,
about my
since we
neighborhood.
are shooting in Prabhadevi, I would love it if you could. Do you know it? Do you know it by heart?
I know it's a very long poem actually, but it's basically about in my lane, which is right next to yours. So this is Prabha Devi Before Dawn. At 5 a.m., Kunal and Savita auntie are unlocking the Amul Dukan. Store shutters yawn open. Rosie the stray blinks and waits for Meena auntie to bring her breakfast. Water is everywhere. In high tide rising at the beach, dew peppering leaves, and buckets filled with grumbling water being carried by car cleaners through the street. Mary, the delivery woman and recovering addict, is yelling first at her passed out lover, then at Kumar Babu to it's the least he can do if he can't pay her extra. Mohammed the watchman tells her to shut up. Pathakji drags his fruit trolley from the cornerstone chapel to under the holy banyan tree, hoping that some god or the other would save his unlicensed dhanda from the cops. Raddiwalas are up already, loading the factory truck with recycled books and paper, getting their kids ready for school. Pinky is smoking her first cigarette of the day right before switching on the medical store lights. Its green cross simmers silently. Pappu Jain, Prabhadevi's sabziwala, heads down to the beach to brush his teeth while his good for nothing son stumbles home with empty pockets. Thank God for his daughter in law, and thank God she speaks English, he says, or else he'd have been a beggar. 12-year-old Moin, angry at being awake this early, stands before the makeshift makbara for a minute, then goes to buy milk for the entire family. Outside the temple, Munna the cow herder feeds Lakshmi and Gauri water, quenching their thirst before their morning stroll begins. Everything is black, so Monet must have been wrong. This is a portrait engorged with blackness. Black cats and bats mewl and howl. Black roads roll outward to a pitch black horizon. Black goddesses and gods allow silence to thrive in a soon to be gone deep indigo sky. Marathoners thunder through, and the road shudders in annoyance. Gulmohars fall off tired trees and decorate the patchy, cracked concrete. They carpet the entire street yellow, and I am convinced that this is from where the sun must bloom.
Oh.
Thank you for allowing me to read that.
Oh, that was really, really nice. That was, I actually got transported into your world of Prabhadevi Before Dawn.
Thank you.
I lost sight of where I was right now. Thank you. That was lovely.
you so
is
much.
this the genre you write in, or do you write in different genres too?
I write in different genres. This is part of when I write about people around me. I really like writing character poems. But when we were talking about what inspires me to write, this was actually, I read somewhere that in Monet's paintings, he didn't believe in the color black. So, according to his impressionist color theory, he would only use really dark colors to show black. But so I wanted to play with that.
Understood. And I also noticed that it's a language that is your own in the sense that it's not Hindi, it's not English, it's a combination of both. Even the twist of the phrases are very Bombaya, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, this is what I take from the Bombay poets. This is what really got me so in love with their poetry, because for the first time when I read Nissim Ezekiel, when I read Arun Kolatkar, Eunice D'Souza, Melanie Salgado, when I read Tara Patel, Namdev Dhasal, Malika Amar Sheikh, I finally felt like this was a vocabulary from which I could take. It was finally, they were speaking in a language that felt like it was mine. It's not English, it's not Hindi, it's not Marathi, it's this, mixed breed of a language
Understood.
that I write in only because of them.
While I'm hearing you speak, I'm seeing a lot of passion. But I'm also wondering how you balance a job with this passion.
Yeah.
And does it come in the way of your job?
Yeah, no, to be really honest, it's not easy. So I have been working jobs since I was 15. And
mentioned that.
Yeah, at first it was just, while I was studying in college. But then after I graduated, it became something that I had to do to sustain my lifestyle. And it is important. I think it's important for women to work and to feel independent, to have your own money. It's not always been easy, because it means, working on the poetry crawls on weekends. It means studying, researching on the poets at night, going, all the way to Mira Road in the morning and then going to work after that.
So does your work get affected?
It did, in the sense that I think more than that, my health was affected when I was
Okay.
working a full-time job, because it did get too much. And I thought I could do it, because everyone in my family is always working and they're always working multiple things. But yeah, I've taken a break from working full-time for this. And now I'm doing part-time work and, freelance gigs.
Okay. So here is a question. And again, this is one of those generational gaps that I struggle with. I hear a lot of people of my generation and maybe a couple of years younger to me saying that this generation, that
Yeah.
generation, just doesn't have work ethic. They just don't know how to, work hard.
Yeah.
They have a lot of passion for things, but they get bored easily.
Yeah.
What's your take on all that?
But I totally get where people from your generation are coming from, because, like, my parents, for instance, who might be a little older than you, like my mom, she runs the house, she cooks, she teaches yoga, she was studying to be a nutritionist when she had us, and she was taking care of us, her in-laws, her husband, while studying, while working. And my grandmoms have been running home since they were 19 and 20, and they're still working for more than 60 years. My dad is supposedly retired, but he still obviously works multiple jobs. He can't stop. So I get where that perspective comes from, because I don't think I can think like that. For me, it's not the most important thing to work. And that does come from a lot of privilege. I do acknowledge that. But if I'm thinking about my friends, let's say other people my age, colleagues I've worked with, I think we just were a little more in tune with what we like, what we don't like. And that kind of encourages us to do what makes us feel better. So at that very personal level, if it means, I will leave work a little early, then sure. If it means I'll leave work early but I'll work at night, that's something that I see happening a lot. Like my friends who work in film, who work in different industries, their work timings are different, but they are the hardest workers I know.
Interesting. So I think you're saying that your generation knows what it wants, more or less. They know
Maybe.
what they want. They certainly know what they don't want.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. The second thing is that they're more flexible about how they work,
Yeah.
but it's not that they're not hardworking.
That's what I see. And the third thing I would add to that is that I don't think a lot of us believe in the hierarchy anymore in the workplace. That was at least difficult for me to digest.
Wow.
The
Wow.
hierarchy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I come from a generation which was all about hierarchies.
Yeah, which I completely understand.
I don't think I could talk to my boss's boss
Yeah.
without my boss knowing. And if I did that, I could get into trouble.
Oh no.
Yeah. That was the reality I came from. I was to find excuses and ways to go and talk to my boss's boss.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, wow. That's quite a difference.
How would you then grow in your field? What would you do?
By working very hard. Yeah, just putting in really long hours, being seen as someone who was working hard, by being very good at what you did.
Yeah.
By being also very smart about navigating through the politics of an organization. I think that remains even today.
That stuff is hard though to navigate.
Oh, yeah, it is, which is why I started my own company 30 years ago.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I was not very good at this navigation bit. Say, oh, that's a butt I need to kiss. Oh, no, sorry, wrong butt. I need to kiss
Right?
this. Yeah, that doesn't work for me either.
God.
That doesn't work for me. So I have come to know that you have a 2-book deal
Yeah.
with Westland Publications, right?
Yes.
And tell me more about this book deal.
So they have acquired 2 poetry books of mine.
Okay.
The first one is ready. So it should hopefully be out next year around this time or June next year. And the second one I have until next year to submit. So hopefully by 2027 it should be out.
And you get paid for the book?
I get paid in advance and
Okay.
then royalty after that
Okay.
once it starts selling.
Once it starts selling. Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It feels huge. It took a while to get here. There were some rejections, some independent publishers, but I knew that I wanted to wait for something that fit what I was looking for long term.
Okay. And what are you looking for long term?
I think the practical things are stuff that I'm not able to handle. So like distributing books, marketing, stuff like that. If you find a publisher who has the resources to do that, it just makes the writer's life easier. So yeah, long term, I do want to keep writing and I want to be read. That's all I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if it starts like that, hopefully it continues.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. Saranya, in all this conversation, there's been a thought in my mind. How is it that different generations respond to poetry? So how does your generation react and respond to poetry? How do your parents' generations respond to poetry? Can you throw some light on that?
I can only speak from my experiences when I have people attend my poetry crawls or when I host workshops for people. I do get a wide range. So I get older generations, younger generations, sometimes school kids, sometimes college kids. I think there is a difference in the way that one absorbs a poem. So I have noticed that the older generation might be, because they've read more or they have more knowledge, they might be better at, or they might be more adept at connecting a poet with the place around, the politics around, the social aspect around. And a lot of the younger generations are very open-minded in the sense that they connect one art form to the other. So you'll find younger people being like, oh, this poem reminds me of this film or this movie or this painting or this dance, for instance.
Wow.
So the lines between strict art forms and those rigid boundaries are kind of collapsed with the younger generations. Whereas the older generations, it's really fun to talk to them about fixating a poem in a place and a time.
So from what I'm hearing, people of all ages respond to poetry,
Absolutely.
just differently.
Absolutely. And I think the most common example of this is music. Any
Absolutely.
Gulzar song, any A.R. Rahman song.
Absolutely.
Everybody loves it.
Yes. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, if you were to explain to your choices that you've made to somebody who's 10 years elder to you, what would you say?
I think first I would actually say, without any ego in the way, I would say thank you for giving us, giving my generation the privilege of freedom with choosing to do what we want and to really opening up so many doors for us. Because I know that my parents had it very different. I would say also that just because we might work through the night or early in the morning or at different times, doesn't mean that the amount of work, the quality or the quantity reduces. It's just a different way of thinking and a different way of working, maybe.
Wow. And if someone who's 10 years younger is watching your journey and whatever you've achieved, what is it that you would want to tell them that they should take away from all that you've done?
I would say the most important lesson for me has been to be honest with yourself. So if you know a piece of writing isn't good, be honest. Like, you have to be your harshest editor. You have to be your harshest critic. You have to be honest whether have you really researched enough for a crawl? Do you really know what you're talking about? If you are writing something, have you put in all those hours or 6 hours of working? You have to be unabashedly honest and your biggest critic.
Being your biggest critic, how does that wane with mental well-being?
I mean, I don't think. I mean, there are ways to do it, of course, but I would say that you shouldn't fear messing up and you shouldn't fear being wrong.
Okay.
Because like I said, like I got a rejection last week from another magazine. It happens, because yeah, it wasn't such a good pitch or the writing wasn't up to mark, and that's okay. Like the next one could be. But yeah, in those ways, I have to be honest with myself.
Okay. So it's about being accepting of yourself with your flaws, with your failures,
Yeah.
but being honest that you didn't give it your best shot.
Absolutely. Like there have been so many times where I've submitted something and it's not, say, won a poetry contest. And when I see the winner's poems, I'm like, oh yeah, I wasn't the best poet. I see
Okay.
such better writing out there.
Okay.
So much more intelligent, expansive writing.
Got
and
it.
you have to be honest with yourself.
Got it. So what are the next frontiers for you?
So personally, it's the books that I'm working on that I really hope to get perfect, and I just want them to be read. So that's one at a personal level. With the Bombay Poetry Crawl, there's quite a bit. So now it's digitizing all of the archives. It's
And where will they be available?
on my website, thebombaypoetrycrawl.com.
Okay.
Yeah, so
okay.
they will be audio-visual archives, literary archives, and I'm also hoping to set up an actual physical space, so a library or an art center where people can come and actually look at the books, not touch them. Some of them are more than 100 years old.
Okay.
So they will be kept in glass cases. But yeah, that is the goal. And also, I'm building this interactive world map of 20th century poetry. Also just expanding the crawls, doing it in different cities and different languages, building my language skills for that. So yeah, lots to do.
And I'm sure you're going to do it all in this very inimitable, oh, I'm just doing it along the way, it's happening style that you have, which I know now is backed by a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that we got to talk. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the show.
Thank
I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And like I said before, I just respect you so much for doing this. I don't know many people who openly compliment others, much less say that they are inspired by a different generation.
Oh, I am.
So I really
am.
respect that about you.
Thank you, but I am. I think the younger generation and this entire process of bridging the gap is so important, not just for one generation or the other. It's for both generations to learn and really leverage what the other brings to the table.
Yeah.
So I'm just so glad I got to talk to you.
Thank you.
And you definitely have one person who's going to buy both those books.
Oh, lovely.
That's a guarantee.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheila.
Saranya reminds us that poetry is not just on the page, but it is in the way that we lead our lives. At a time when things are really not easy to understand, this conversation with Saranya has made me realize her journey is a reminder that meaning cannot always be found along a straight path. Sometimes you need to follow the thread, even if it takes you off the beaten path. If this episode moved you, or made you think of your own creative calling, or inspired you to go on a Bombay poetry crawl, then our job is done. And if you know someone who has an inspiring story to share, do let us know. We would love to host them on Bridging the Gap. Until we meet again, stay sweet, stay zen.